Friday, July 19th, 2024, just after 2 in the afternoon in Sydney. At an airport a few kilometers away, a check-in terminal does the same thing. Then the one next to it. Then the bank down the street. Then a hospital. Then a television studio. Mid-broadcast. Live. Nobody in that building did anything wrong. Nobody clicked a bad link. Nobody opened an attachment. Their computers had just been told, by software they paid to protect them, to stop working. The first thing worth understanding about this outage is the shape of it in time. The update went out at 4:09 in the morning UTC. That's mid-afternoon in Australia, early morning in Europe, the middle of the night in New York. So it hit Australia and Asia during a working Friday afternoon. Then it rolled west, and it kept arriving exactly when each region woke up and turned its computers on. Europe got it with morning coffee. The east coast of the United States got it as people came in for the last day of the week. By the time American offices opened, the internet had already had 6 hours to decide what was happening. And the guess almost everyone made first was an attack. It wasn't. Nobody attacked anything. The software had done this to itself. To get why one file could do this much damage, we need to talk about where it lives. An operating system has two zones. On the outside, user mode, where your browser runs, where your email client runs, where basically everything you interact with runs. Programs out here are fenced in. If your browser crashes, it just closes. The machine keeps going. On the inside, kernel mode, this is the part that talks to the hardware. Memory, disks, network cards, the scheduler that decides which program gets the CPU next. Code in here has no fence. It can read any memory it wants. It can touch any device. And if it makes a mistake, if it reaches for something that isn't there, the operating system has no way to contain the damage, because there's nothing left underneath to contain it with. So Windows does the only safe thing available. It stops. Immediately. That's what a blue screen is. It isn't a crash report. It's a controlled demolition performed to prevent an out-of-control kernel from corrupting the disk on its way down. Now, the company in this story is CrowdStrike, and their product is called Falcon. It's endpoint detection and response software. Its job is to watch everything happening on a machine and notice when something looks like an attack. To do that properly, it needs to see everything, every process that starts, every file that opens, every network connection, and it needs to see them before malware can hide itself, which means it has to live in the kernel. That's not laziness or bad design, that's the deal. You cannot watch the whole machine from outside the machine. Every serious endpoint security product on Windows made the same choice. The trade-off is permanent, and it is not subtle. To protect the system, you put your software somewhere that can destroy the system. There's a second distinction that matters, and it's the one that turned this from a bug into a global event. Falcon ships two different kinds of updates. The first is the sensor itself, the actual program. New versions of that go through the full process. Testing, staging, rolled out to a small slice of customers first, watched, then widened. Customers can even choose to stay a version or two behind on purpose. The second kind is content, configuration data, files that tell the already installed sensor what patterns to look for. CrowdStrike called this rapid response content, and the name is the whole argument. When a new attack technique appears in the wild at 9 in the morning, customers want detection for it by 9:15, not next Tuesday. Speed is the product. So content didn't take the staircase. Content went out to every machine, everywhere, at once. The reasoning behind this was it's just data. Data can't crash a kernel, code crashes kernels. The problem is that the sensor has to read that data. The reading is done by code, in the kernel. 5 months before any of this, in February, CrowdStrike added a new detection capability to Falcon. It watched a particular kind of communication between processes on Windows, named pipes, the plumbing that lets programs talk to each other locally. Attackers use it, so it's worth watching. To describe what to look for, they defined a template. Think of it as a blank form with a fixed number of boxes on it. The form was built with 21 boxes. The code that fills in the form supplied 20 values. That mismatch went in, and nothing happened. There was a validator whose entire job was to check these files before release. It looked at them and approved them. Because it was built on the same assumption as the code that filled the form, it also believed there were 20. There was stress testing in March. It passed. And then between April and July, several more of these files shipped to everyone with no problems whatsoever. The reason nothing broke is specific, and it's the hinge of this whole story. Every one of those earlier files put a wildcard in the 21st box. Match anything. Don't care. And when the sensor sees don't care, it never actually goes and reads the value. There's nothing to compare it against. It skips the box. For 5 months, the 21st value was missing from a form that expected it, and no one found out, because for 5 months, nobody looked. On July 19th, 2 new files went out. Channel file 291. They were, in every visible respect, the same kind of thing that had shipped safely a dozen times. One of them had a real value in the 21st box, not a wildcard, an actual thing to match against, which meant that for the first time, the sensor was going to have to go and read it. The code went looking for value number 21 in a list that had 20 entries. It didn't find anything. That would have been survivable. It read whatever memory happened to sit past the end of that list and treated it as valid data. That's an out-of-bounds read. In user mode, it's a bug. The program crashes, you reopen it, you file a ticket. In kernel mode, it's an unhandled exception with nothing above it to catch it. Every Windows machine running Falcon that received that file and read it did exactly the same thing in the same instant for the same reason. Here's what made this so much worse than a normal bad update. The Falcon sensor is a boot start driver. It loads early enough to be watching before anything else gets a chance to run, which is the entire point of it. So the machine powers on, the kernel loads, Falcon reads channel file 291, Falcon reads past the end of the list, blue screen. Reboot. The kernel loads, Falcon reads channel file 291. The machine could not get far enough into starting up to download the fix that would have stopped it from crashing. CrowdStrike caught the problem and pulled the file back at 5:27 UTC, 78 minutes after it went out. That revision protected every machine that hadn't downloaded it yet, and it did nothing at all for the ones that had. Those machines weren't online anymore. They were in the loop. The blast radius was already set. It was around 8.5 million Windows devices. The fix was known within hours, and it was almost insultingly simple. Boot into safe mode, go to the CrowdStrike folder, delete the file, restart. 90 seconds of work. There was no way to do it remotely because the machines weren't reachable. There was no way to push it out because pushing things out required something on the other end to receive it. Somebody had to be physically in front of every single affected computer. Delta alone had to manually reset around 40,000 servers, and for a lot of organizations, there was one more door in the way: full disk encryption. Enterprise machines encrypt their drives, which is correct and responsible, but to boot into recovery mode and delete a file, you need the recovery key. Those keys live in a management system, which is a server, which, for a good number of companies that Friday, was itself sitting in the loop, rebooting into a blue screen, holding the keys to every laptop in the building. Some IT teams spent that weekend reading recovery keys out loud over the phone, one machine at a time. While that was happening, the world was having a fairly bad day. Around 5,000 commercial flights were canceled globally. Airlines went back to paper. Boarding passes got written by hand. Hospitals canceled surgeries and appointments. GP systems across the UK went dark, so doctors couldn't pull up patient records. Emergency call handling was disrupted in several US states. Payment terminals stopped, broadcasters went off air, banks, freight, logistics, courts, transit systems. Most sectors were back within days. Delta wasn't. Its crew scheduling system, the thing that tracks which pilots and flight attendants are legally allowed to be where, lost track of its own people and couldn't resynchronize. Aircraft were fine, crews were fine, the system that connected the two was not, and there was no manual fallback for that at the scale of a major airline. Delta canceled roughly 7,000 flights over 5 days and stranded something like 1.3 million passengers. One estimate put direct losses to Fortune 500 companies at around $5.4 billion, most of it uninsured. Global figures ran higher. Delta put its own damage at about $500 million. CrowdStrike's stock dropped roughly 11% that day and kept falling for weeks. The CEO was called to testify before Congress. The company sent partners $10 food delivery vouchers as an apology, and enough of them got flagged as fraudulent by payment processor that the vouchers themselves became a story. Delta sued for $500 million. CrowdStrike countersued, arguing that other airlines running the same software recovered in a day, and that Delta's own aging systems and its refusal of on-site help were the reason it took 5. A judge trimmed the case down in May 2025, but let the core claims through. It still hasn't gone to trial. A separate shareholder suit against CrowdStrike was dismissed. CrowdStrike published a preliminary review 5 days later and a full root cause analysis in August, and the charges tracked the failure closely. Content updates now go out in staged rings instead of all at once, so a bad file reaches a small population first. Customers can control the timing themselves. The validator was rewritten to actually check that the number of values matches the number of fields, and the interpreter that reads these files got bounds checking, so that reaching for entry 21 in a list of 20 returns an error instead of whatever was lying next to it in memory. Microsoft made a larger move. Historically, an agreement with European regulators required them to give third-party security vendors the same level of kernel access their own products had. After July 2024, they started building a way out, a Windows endpoint security platform that lets antivirus and EDR software run in user mode, developed together with CrowdStrike, ESET, Bitdefender, Trend Micro, and others. A private preview went to partners in 2025. It's a slow migration and it isn't finished, but the direction is set. Get the watchers out of the room they can destroy. The gap in this story is 5 months wide. In February, a form was built with 21 boxes and filled with 20 values. From that moment, every machine running Falcon was one file away from a blue screen. It shipped, it passed testing, it ran in production on millions of machines, it survived a dozen updates. None of that made it safe, it only made it quiet. The defect was fully present the entire time, waiting for the one file that would ask for the box nobody had ever asked for. On July 19th at 4:09 in the morning, someone finally asked.